Bibliophiles of the internet, today I'm here to share what I read for the Queer Lit Readathon. As I'm sure most of you know, the Queer Lit Readathon is an event that happens 4 times a year, and it was created to encourage folks to read nothing but queer books. I was incredibly honored that Kathy and Rogan invited me to come back as a co-host this past round. I had so much fun running some impromptu silent reading sprints, and they also very kindly let me work on the recommendation graphics that you might have seen on social media. I spend an obscene amount of time working in Canva, and you know, sometimes it pays off. I will also be including Kathy's announcement video down below that has all the dates for the 2023 rounds, and I will just say that the Queer Lit Readathon may or may not be running for an entire month next June. You'll have to watch to find out. So thank you to them once again for allowing me to be a co-host and for running another wonderful round. I truly do appreciate all of the work they both continuously pour into this. With all that said, I'm going to share the 4 books I read this round, the challenges I completed, and all of my thoughts. Let's get started! As predicted, the first book I finished this round was my arc of As You Walk On By Julian Winters. Viking Books for Young Readers is releasing this on January 17th. It's a queer contemporary coming-of-age story about a young black boy named Theo whose dad has his whole future planned out, from his extracurricular activities to his future acceptance at Duke. But for now, all Theo wants is the picture-perfect prom experience. He and his 2 friends are also pretty introverted, so they have this tradition that once a month they all give each other dares as a way to push themselves out of their comfort zones. And this time, Theo's friend Jay dares him to prompose to the guy he's secretly been crushing on. Theo has a whole plan for how he's going to do it at this huge end-of-the-year party, but after an epically cringeworthy fail, he finds himself hiding from everyone else in an empty room upstairs. There, he's kind of having this existential crisis, and slowly throughout the night he's joined by more and more misfits, including an ex-friend and a super cute boy, as they try to escape the party and their own problems themselves. Content warnings for some experienced racism, experienced homophobia and biphobia, some underage drinking and drug use, brief references to child death and grief, and references to sexual harassment and sexist comments. There are some authors who are continuously drawn to the same central question that drives all of their stories in different ways, and Julian is one of those authors. The question his stories always come back to is, how do I figure out who I am and honor the truth of that person? How do I figure out what my future can or should look like? As I was telling some friends, that question is only going to lose mileage when it stops being relevant, but it's a damn good question that's never not going to be relevant, so I think that's also why it's always going to be interesting to see his approach. With that said, I really appreciate how the story sort of slots in with the rest of Julian's stories thematically, but it's also so much different than what he's done before in terms of actual content. It's kind of like that quintessential high school story about cliques, fitting in, going to all the big parties, that kind of stuff. And while the story itself doesn't take place over the course of one night, a decent portion of the story is spent on that one night at the party where time seems to stop, and it seems like the night's never going to end because more and more things just keep happening, and it's almost like this weird sort of youthful magic. I think Julian perfectly captures the potential and excitement of a night like that, and as the title is hinting at, there's also plenty of good Breakfast Club vibes as these random classmates are learning more about each other in this self-contained space. And because they're being thrown together like that, the story is really able to start breaking down the barriers between them and showing that the circles they usually move in are limiting or superficial in some ways. These characters are far more than the clubs they've joined, the friends they keep, or the labels they use. I feel like that's the heart of the story, realizing how difficult it can be to extract the truth of yourself from all the things people expect you to be. The world will find a million different ways to categorize us, impose different assumptions or stereotypes upon us, and this story is about how it's really difficult to look inwards and block out that noise, especially for young folks. And what I appreciate most about that is how the story is interrogating those labels or boundaries in ways that are more superficial, like what clique you might belong to, what clothes you might wear, to things that have far greater implications on our safety, well-being, and quality of life, such as gender, sexuality, or race. That's what I think and what I hope young readers will take away from this story, that ideally nothing in life should be compulsory or something that we do just to please others or create a certain image of ourselves. We should all be active participants in our friendships, our relationships, our family dynamics, our futures, and our life choices. So like I said, this really is just like a quintessential high school story. Lots of queer joy, lots of good friendship moments and laughs, and a lot of hard lessons learned on the path to healing and growing, and I feel like there's really nothing else I could want from Julian Winters. I will say that there's a bit of a budding romance happening in the background of this story. It's not the focus of the story by any means, but I also didn't feel fully invested in that relationship the way I usually do in Julian's books, just because there's such a huge learning curve happening in a really short amount of space. But this was still thematically solid. Julian Winters always delivers, and I will always be on board for everything he writes. I gave this 4 stars. For the bingo board, I believe I counted this one towards intersectional queer joy and brings you joy, because Julian is an author who can always put a smile on my face. The second book I read was Fence Rise, aka Fence Volume 5 by Joanna the Mad and C.S. Packet. This is the long-awaited continuation of the Fence comic series. It's a queer sports comic about Nicholas, who's a scrappy underdog fencer, relatively self-taught, and set on becoming the absolute best. He finds himself accepted to a private academy called King's Row, where he'll not only have to prove himself and earn his spot on the fencing team, but also come to terms with the fact that Seiji Katayama, his sworn rival, is going to be his roommate. This comic series is always such a joy to read. It truly does read like a classic sports anime or manga, and as I've said before, both creators have been pretty open about how they want to create something that feels like Haikyuu, Yuri on Ice, and all those other sports anime series. If you ask me, I think they have succeeded in doing that many times over at this point. I just love this wacky fencing team of misfits who are trying to push each other to be better. There's comedy, there's camaraderie, there's friendship, and there's torturously delicious slow burn romances. It's always a fun read, and this was a really exciting installment because the Kings Row boys have been invited to this elite training camp, and they're introduced to all these other fencing teams who have wildly different fencing styles and quirks, and it's just fun to see them go through those tournament-style matchups. I enjoyed it. I like how the art style changes to convey different tones or comedic moments. There's plenty of good fencing action in this one, a bit more backstory as well, and it definitely leaves me eagerly awaiting Volume 6. It does seem a bit rushed in some ways, like there's not always a ton of visual details, the backgrounds tend to drop out quite a bit and things like that. It doesn't feel like the most polished or grounded volume of Fence I've ever read, but that doesn't make me love it any less, so I gave this 4 stars. For the bingo board, I believe I counted this one towards not a novel catch-up, and I decided it would also go for genre mashup because it's a sports comedy, so why not? Then I finally got to read If You Still Recognize Me by Cynthia So. This is written by a queer, non-cis Chinese-British author, and it's a sapphic coming-of-age story about a Chinese-British character named Elsie who was struggling to get over a really bad breakup with a toxic ex, and so she threw herself into this fandom for a sci-fi comic, which is how she met Ada, her crush. Ada lives an entire ocean away and writes fanfiction for a ship in this fandom that a lot of people headcanon as sapphic, and because it's a really niche ship, that's how the two of them connected. Elsie is hopelessly in love with Ada, and she's decided that this is the summer she's gonna tell Ada how she really feels. But right before Elsie confesses, her childhood best friend Joan comes back into the picture since she just moved back to attend Oxford, I believe, and as Elsie undertakes this grand gesture to prove her love to Ada, she and Joan are also starting to reconnect. Content warnings for mentions of death and grief, some experienced racism and homophobia, descriptions and explorations of past emotionally abusive relationships, and explorations of family disownment. This book was far and away my favorite thing I read all week, and honestly, one of the best contemporary books I've ever read in my life. To all of my friends and mutuals who kept coming into my DMs and comments telling me that this was the book for me, that I was gonna love it, that it was gonna be 5 stars, you were absolutely right. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your impeccable taste. First, let me just say, I think in my last book haul I mentioned I first heard about this on TikTok during the Heartstopper era, you know, that period of time where every author and creator was pitching literally every single book as Heartstopper meets X, Y, and Z, and I can now confirm that this does actually have major Heartstopper vibes. To be absolutely clear, this is not me saying to go into this expecting a carbon copy of Heartstopper, because obviously they're two completely different stories trying to do completely different things. But I think they really stack up in their gentle earnestness and those elements of self-discovery and healing that can be joyous but also extremely painful or frightening, and of course because they both showcase some really heartwarming and complex romances and friendships. I genuinely don't even know where to begin. This story made my heart so incredibly happy in a way I can't even fully express. I'm not gonna lie, I don't have a ton of free time these days, but this is a book that made me stop in my tracks. Once I picked it up for the day, for the evening, whatever it may be, I did not want to stop. I think what strikes me the most about this story is how beautifully and emotionally it captures that feeling of yearning in so many ways. Not only is Elsie yearning for both Ada and Joan in a way that's achingly torturous, but she has this deep longing to become the person she's always meant to be, to figure out what she should do, and to learn how she can possibly bridge the cavernous gap between her experiences and her feelings. What she's experiencing is almost happening on a different plane than how she feels about it, and as you learn in the story, there's a whole host of reasons as to why that is. She feels like she has to put on this facade of being the perfect daughter, the perfect student, the perfect friend, because her past experiences have taught her that relationships can't withstand change or deviations from the status quo. She's afraid if she tells Ada how she really feels, she might lose their friendship. She's afraid if she dresses the way she wants to dress and loves who she wants to love, her family might not support her. She's afraid if she lets Joan back into her life might become unrecognizable in ways that she's not ready to confront. Through so many things like breakups, family disconnection, lost friendships, homophobia, what have you, the world seems to be reinforcing this message to Elsie that everything beautiful and worth having in life is fragile, and that change is what is going to shatter that delicate balance. There's also an added layer of complexity because of the story's intersectionality, because of Elsie's Chinese heritage and the cultural norms, beliefs, and values that have informed so much of what she believes. In so many ways, she's been taught that if she's too much, then she's going to lose the things in life she cares about the most, and that can be a really hard mental block to overcome, which is why I love that the story shows how she makes mistakes. It shows that her instinct for self-preservation that comes from all of those experiences doesn't always lead her towards making the right choice. There's also this element of adventure as Elsie and her friends travel around the UK, as Elsie tries to take on this grand romantic gesture that she thinks is for Ada but might actually be for herself. And that's really fun to read about, but it also adds emotional resonance. That adventure, that undertaking, represents a willful deviation from the norm, and especially with the grand gesture, Elsie runs into so many roadblocks, and it becomes this thing where it's not even about successfully completing the mission, but rather refusing to give up. And I think that's really powerful, not with what she's actually trying to do or trying to find, but that she is resolving to keep going, to keep searching, to keep asking questions, and to push herself to grow throughout this process. And I think that's really a central theme in the story, this idea that no, I'm not always going to get it right. I'm going to make mistakes, I'm going to get it wrong, but that doesn't mean I let myself off the hook, and that doesn't mean I stop trying. What I really love about this book is that it's such a comprehensive, well-rounded, coming-of-age story in every sense of what that phrase means. Some young adult coming-of-age stories only focus on one area of growth, whether that's love or identity or overcoming challenges, and to be perfectly clear, all of those things are incredibly valuable areas of focus. But this story is a true celebration of growth in so many areas of life. It painstakingly shows Elsie's journey as she grows into her love, into her queerness, into her family, into her friends, into her healing, into her future, and of course, into herself. I truly have not even scratched the surface in what makes this book so incredibly special. It has humor, levity, joy, uncertainty, adventure, slow burn romance, fandom, truly stunning writing with imagery and prose that borders on pure poetry at times. It truly struck my heart in such a profound way, and I had to give it 5 stars. For the bingo board, this one counted towards intersectional, brings you joy, 5-star prediction, and the free space, which I decided to make published outside of the US. And finally, in the 11th hour, I was able to also finish Go For It Again Nakamura by Sionde. This is the sequel to Go For It Nakamura, which is a queer satirical slice-of-life manga following Nakamura, a young gay closeted Japanese boy who is head over heels in love with his popular classmate Hirose, who pretty much doesn't know that he exists. Nakamura is a very head-in-the-clouds kind of guy who experiences an incredible amount of gay panic on a daily basis. He's always entertaining these over-the-top fantasies and daydreams of him and Hirose being together, which is what finally pushes him to try and at least become friends. In the first volume, he is able to successfully befriend Hirose in a very genuine way, and this volume is exploring whether he can actually survive being friends with his crush. I didn't write down any content warnings for this one because I read it so quickly, but I would give a content warning for allusions to a non-sexual, inappropriate student-teacher relationship. I enjoy this manga series so much. The tagline of satirical slice of life is truly the perfect descriptor for this series. I think it gets a lot of undue criticism because people often feel like queer stories aren't worth reading if they're not romances, or if you don't know whether the queer main character ends up with someone, and I personally can't subscribe to that kind of thinking because it sets a very dangerous precedent for how we value queerness. Acting queer, looking queer, especially as it's defined through a cishet lens, and your relationship status are not what defines or validates queerness. And sorry, not sorry to inform you, but they never will. Anyways, as I said in my TBR video, what I love about the series is that it feels like a series of one-shots. Every chapter is its own self-contained instance of queer panic that Nakamura is experiencing. He's always super in his head and convinced that this is the one time that Hirose is going to reciprocate his feelings, and there's always a super funny turn that spins the entire chapter on its head. I really enjoy that format because it perfectly highlights those comedic elements that are so strong and also makes the entire thing feel accessible because there's not an overarching narrative full of details that you need to remember in order to fully appreciate each chapter for exactly what it is. I will admit I'm a bit torn about how this volume ends because it feels like it's setting up for a third installment, and anyone who's been following the series from the beginning, like myself, knows that even getting a second volume after 5 years had passed was already a long shot in the first place. It almost didn't happen, so in many ways it kind of felt like we were super lucky to even get this much, but now we have to wait and see if we get a third installment, which we very well may not. Obviously I hope we do, but again, nothing is guaranteed, so I would have preferred that the mangaka left things a bit more open-ended as opposed to leaving on a sort of cliffhanger or even making the second volume feel self-contained so that even if we don't get a third one, there's still some feeling of closure or satisfaction. I'm also not super stoked about the inappropriate student-teacher relationship I alluded to before, and again, I cannot emphasize enough that it is not sexual or physical in any way. It's things like a teacher giving a student a ride home, spending time together outside of class, exchanging numbers, etc. Especially as someone who used to work in education, even though I acknowledge there may be some cultural differences, those are just unthinkable boundaries that you do not cross. Again, because of where the story leaves off, I don't know what the creator is trying to do with that storyline, and again, because we might not get a third book, I might not ever know so that I can at least try to understand or at least see the larger context. So yeah, I'm kind of torn about this one because it was fun to read, it was laugh out loud funny, it has a great commentary on finding the balance between romantic and platonic feelings, but it also left me feeling a bit unsatisfied and confused as to where the story might be going, so overall I couldn't really give this one any more than 4 stars. This one once again counted towards not a novel, it was also intersectional, and I counted it towards the catch-up space and the satire/comedy space. Looking at my bingo board by the end of the week, I believe I only got 1 bingo in the 3rd row going across, but I got pretty close to making a few more, and I did complete more than half the challenges, so I consider that to be a success. So those are all the books I read for the Queer Lit Readathon. If you've read any of them yourself, I would love to hear your thoughts down below, and if you took part yourself, let me know if you found any new favorites. But that's everything I had to share with you for today. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page. Bye!